Alright guys, so today I'm going to talk about my experience this past summer. I lived in a Buddhist monastery for about 40 days in rural Burma. I was teaching English to the monks, but mostly I went to learn. I went as a non-Buddhist, and so living in the monastery, it was mostly kind of a philosophical thing that prompted me to go, but also very much a political kind of thing that popped up at Princeton, and I transferred that to the summer experience. I wanted to start by saying that I'm not trying to bring the lesson or a moral to this, but rather I'm just trying to share a story. And then don't think too much of it, don't look too much into it. It's more of how these people, these human beings, the monks in the monastery, live their lives, and how we can bring that to Princeton or to our lives in general. Not in a religious sense, but rather as a story. So, Burma is largely a Buddhist country in Southeast Asia. Over 90% of the population is Buddhist. And 3% of the population are monks. It has a very vast culture based largely around Buddhism. And so it's the custom in Burma that if you're a young child, usually every male and female become a monk or a nun for about a week in their lives. It's more than a religious symbol, it's more of it's a tradition. So everybody does it. So the institution of the monks is very much embedded in society in Burma. And since 1946, if I'm not mistaken, Burma had been in a military dictatorship when their general, the then president, was killed. And so it'd been very oppressive, and up to 3 years ago, it was one of the most closed countries in the world. One day, the government decided to raise fuel prices, and that just made the people extremely angry. That made food more expensive, school more expensive, getting to work more expensive. And so the country was in turmoil, and even the monks decided to join in. That was called the Saffron Revolution. So the monks are largely a non-political institution. They take care of themselves, and they're seen as kind of a higher ground above society. Because what they do is develop their spiritual personalities. They meditate, they try to reach nirvana, if you will, and they serve as priests, in a way. But in this case, the monks said that the population was so outraged, or the people actually needed their help, so they stepped in. And there were literally thousands of monks marching through the streets with their bowls upside down, kind of excommunicating the government. But if you think about it, like I said earlier, these soldiers are Burmese people. So most of them had been monks when they were children, or had brothers who were still monks, or had even parents who had been monks at some point in their lives, and so on. And so what was so shocking about this revolution was that at one point the government just cracked. And they started shooting the monks, arresting them, raiding monasteries, and it was basically unheard of. If you're a Jew, think about the police suddenly shooting rabbis. If you're a Christian, think about the police shooting priests or nuns. It doesn't happen. But it happened in Burma, a country where 90% of the people were Buddhist, and everybody felt the weight of that. And the way that this kind of came to Princeton was that last year, Dean Matt Weiner, in the Office of Religious Life, brought these 3 monks who were big leaders in the Saffron Revolution on the ground to screen a documentary called Burma VJ, which was illegal footage taken on the ground of the monks marching, of the police shooting people, and it was very much a powerful experience. After the documentary, Dean Matt Weiner invited these 3 monks in, and they were now refugees in the United States. They had fled, they told their stories, they fled their monasteries or their houses from Burma, many times with the police having a gun to one of their family members' heads so that they could come to America and just to live another day. So they have to leave behind their families, they had to leave behind their friends. And I was in this room, it was McCormick 101 with about 15 people, and it was silent, and as these 3 heroes march in, everybody was still silent. And having just gone through that documentary and seeing these people who had just done way more than I could ever imagine to do in my life, and everybody's silent, I felt a little ashamed that I didn't stand up and clap for them, or that it was hard to acknowledge how big of a movement they had created in their country. I was lucky enough to get to know them after the documentary and over 6 months. As I said, as a non-Buddhist, so more in a philosophical kind of curiosity way. And I told them, I'm interested in Buddhist philosophy. I'd like to learn a little bit more. And what you just showed me was so powerful. I want to know what that's about. I want to go to Burma. How can I help, if in any way? And with the mentorship of Dean Matt Weiner here at Princeton, I met this monk, Ulaga, the shortest one. He put me in touch with his former master in Burma, who was about to open a new monastery outside of Rangoon, outside of the capital. It was going to be a teaching monastery where he wanted to teach English to monks so that they could pursue higher education in Sri Lanka or India, or just talk to tourists, or just kind of help open up Burma to the world. And so I decided that that summer I would go to Burma. After a few emails, kind of mostly informal with the master and his brother, he said, yeah, if you're ever in Burma, come by. I'm like, okay, I'm going to come in June. He's like, yeah, if you're ever in Burma, come by. I'm like, okay, June it is. So I put on a backpack and went to Burma. I got there at night, called the master on his phone number, nobody picked up. Well, that's fine. I looked up my guidebook, got a hotel, had some nice dinner, went to bed. In the morning, I called him up again. And then the second time, luckily he picked up. And I said, hey, I'm in Burma, can I come by? And he said, yeah, come by, but the monastery's not ready yet. Do you want to hang out at the hotel for a few weeks? I said, I don't think I have a few weeks. I'll come today. And so, okay. He sent a car to pick me up, and I went to the monastery. And lo and behold, the monastery was not ready. It was mostly like this first picture right here. So he said, I'm sorry, the only place you can stay is this bamboo hut. And I said, that's great. I love the bamboo hut. It was about half the size of this stage. There were cracks all over it, animals walking in and out. It was cold at night, it was hot during the day. When it was monsoon time, so when it rained, everything got wet. But it was wonderful. I remember my first night there, and I lied down under the mosquito net, just on the stray kind of ground, and you could hear everything, like animals walking around and bugs, and just it was such a real experience of being in an unsheltered place with 4 days ahead of me and not sure what I would be doing. It was an unfinished monastery. They had monks building stuff all around, cooking all around, and still figuring out what's going to happen. And he's like, hey, I'm glad you came. Now we have an English teacher. I'm like, let's go on with it. So one of my first nights there, it was the biggest rainstorm I've ever been in. Monsoon season is absolutely crazy. It really pours. And this time my bamboo hut could not really support it. So everything was getting wet. All my clothes were wet at that point. And then I thought, what do I have to save? And so I took my laptop where everything was, my visa in Burma, and then my visa to return to the United States, and kind of like tucked them under my shirt and went to sleep like this. And in the morning we were fine. My clothes were not, but we were. The visa and the laptop were. And another day, there was a cat that kept visiting me at night. And this cat once brought me a gift. I woke up the next morning, and I see the cat, I'm like, oh, go away, go away. And then when I pull the mosquito net, there's this half-eaten lizard. Thanks a lot, cat. Well, but living in the bamboo hut was amazing. And mostly because I was neighbors with over 100 monks. And like I said, I'm not trying to, the monks were not saints. They were very much normal people. But the way they approached their daily lives was a bit different than what we usually do. So every morning, actually let me talk about food after. They were there to study English. And just like us, they moved to a monastery. They left their families behind, left their former masters behind, left their former friends behind, to go live in a place where they would have a full experience. Just like us coming to Princeton in a way. And obviously, as we're Princeton students, I have to talk about studying it with a passion. But these monks did it. And the difference is they didn't complain about it. And gosh, I complain all the time too. But seriously, they would wake up at 7 a.m. and they would have classes for 5 or 6 hours straight. And after the 5th hour, I'd be like, do you guys want to do another lesson for half an hour? Yeah, every time. Every single time. And after they're done, they're like, hey, can you come speak to us or talk to us? Yeah, we can speak. And they were just so focused on taking the most out of it every single moment. They asked for extra books to read. They would record lessons so that they could listen to it afterwards. It was just 100% dedication to what they were doing. And they acknowledged that what they were doing at the time was learning English. And so they went 100% into it. They helped each other, and they competed with each other. The master actually asked me to always put their grades on the board so that they could have a sense of who was doing better than the other. But the difference was that when somebody, quote unquote, won, he got smiles, or he got a handshake, he got a pat on the back. But like, we can do that too. But the way they did it was actually legitimate. And I can't tell you, and I can't tell you what describes it as being legitimate or not, because all of us are guilty of sometimes not really being that happy for our peers. And that's a shame, because they really were. And I just, again, it's not an experience out of this world. They were just human. They were just simple. They were down to earth. They were mindful in it. Another thing that really touched me about this was that every morning the monks would have to wake up at 4:30 a.m., form this big line, and silently walk to the nearby village so that they could beg for food. That was basically their meals. I was not allowed to eat from this food because I was not a monk, and as a lay person, the donations were not meant for me. But they would all walk out there as a group, we'll come back, cook as a group, eat as a group, and wash dishes as a group. Everything was kind of done in a communal way. And the way they interacted with each other reflected the way they ate their meals as well. It's not that all the monks were holding hands and hugging and kumbaya all the time. They were just respectful of each other. Their baseline of human interaction level was just much more heartwarming than what we're usually used to in the Western world. And so, a few examples of them to kind of show that even though, yes, they took vows to live a very specific kind of lifestyle, they understood that as being monks, they were supposed to live a certain path. They were still very much human. So for example, this one on the left, who's here teaching, Unisakara, he loved Taylor Swift. He just really liked listening to Taylor Swift, and I would catch him walking around and singing in a really high-pitched voice, mean all the time, just all the time. And he'd ask for lyrics of the song so that he could sing along with them. And that was his way of studying a little bit more. And on the same note, Unandia over there told me once, "Sir, if Miley Cyrus ever comes to Burma, I'm going to disrobe." And again, no judging, that's good for him. I mean, I don't think Miley Cyrus has made her way to Burma yet. He's still a monk. But even though they were able to treat each other with respect, they made jokes about him being fat, him being darker, and everybody laughed with it. There was no racism, nobody had their guards up. And I'm not saying that that's the way we should go about things, of just be able to say whatever you want. Obviously, that's not applicable. But people were much less armed there. It was just more relaxed. It was a step down. It was mindful. The way they like to talk about mindfulness. And I was skeptical at first because I'm like, well, I'm not looking at this as a Buddhist as you guys are. No, this is not religion. This is just how we live our lives. And the master would talk to me about the 6 heavens, or how you'll suffer in one of the 3 hells. But you can take that with a grain of salt. But when he talked about human interaction, that's just simple. That's not religion. That's not necessarily spiritual even. Mindfulness was rather taking it a step at a time. Mindfulness is definitely not YOLO. Mindfulness is bringing it down a level and kind of disarming yourselves. And that's what touched me about the monastery. I made friends with not monks, but human beings. And I learned how to live in community with them. And again, I'm just trying to share a story. I'm not saying that coming to Princeton, I want to shave my head and try to live like them. But I did get a tattoo out of it. I tried to think about it more often than I would have otherwise. I tried to sometimes take a couple steps back and breathe. And just be in the monastery again. And think about what it means to actually see another human being in front of you and interact with them with the way they deserve or the way you would like to. Thank you.